I've been very fortunate in being able to visit many countries, all on the north side of the equator, though. I've been fortunate in being able to travel to so many countries and around the world, but I've never crossed the equator. It's all been on the northern half of the hemisphere. In this next few videos, I'm going to talk about Europe and the trips that Shirley and I made and the ones I made by myself. But I'm going to try to combine them into groupings without worrying about whether we were in Italy certain years or whatever. There won't be separate ones for each year. Just to give you a general flavor of each of the countries that we were at and some of the interesting things that we found. And we'll try to keep it as succinct and to the point as possible. Although Shirley traveled with me a lot, first trip she made with me were to Japan. So the first trips to Europe that I made, to Italy and Portugal, will in some cases be without her. I want to start out with the first trip I made to Italy in the early 70s to Milan, and I'll tell you about that experience as a kind of a separate thing. And also I'll talk about Portugal because Shirley never went to Portugal with me, and I'll include that part of it. And then the other travels will be with her in France and other countries. So we'll start out with my first trip to Italy in 1972. My first trip was in 1972 when I was at GE. I went to Milan and met a representative that the company was using to place a construction of molds in Italy. So I flew to Milan and met him, and we drove across the top of Italy to Venice. And we stayed overnight in Venice, right in on the island. It was an experience. And then we drove around the northern part of Italy to various places. I had a number of molds I wanted to place, so my hotel was right near the train terminal in Milan, and Mussolini had built that terminal, and it was a grotesque looking architecture. I've just got to add this little story here now. Um, I'm sure it's no surprise to hear that Italian drivers are well, verge on the insane and the maniac category. But this guy that the company was contracting to assist placing molds over in Italy. His name was Pino, and I won't say his last name, but Pino was a young fellow in his 20s, and he had a Ritmo, a little Italian car, 4-cylinder, that top speed straight down was probably 85 miles an hour, and he drove that thing floorboarded all the time, and it was pretty comical. He was trying to impress me with its performance, but it was pretty pathetic. But he drove like a maniac. And the airport is a fair distance from Milan, and of course he drove it flat out all the way right into town. And we came to a stoplight, and there were a couple of cars stopped at this red light, and we were in the city, and so instead of stopping in traffic there and waiting for the light to change, he made a quick right twist on the steering wheel and bounced up over the curb onto the sidewalk. And we drove down the sidewalk, and at the corner there was a department store, and the entrance of the store was at an angle to the street, 45-degree angle to the street, so that the front of the store cut across from the right, between the sidewalks, going in each direction. So that made a large triangular flat spot in front of the store. So we wheel around the corner, and right in front of the store. I looked in and went in the plate glass windows of that store as we went by, and on down the other sidewalk, and we drove down a little way until he found a gap in the car. So we're parked along the street, and we bounced off of the curb and back into traffic, all in one swift, smooth motion. Oh, it's crazy. But I guess this is as good a place as any to tell this story too. Uh, we drove quite a few miles around Italy, going to the various shops, and we were coming back to Milan from someplace, and it was dark and it was raining. And as we came into Milan, I noticed that there were bonfires along the highway, and it looked like people were standing around out in the rain with burning tires along the highway. And I asked Pino, why are these people burning tires in this kind of weather? And he told me that they were prostitutes, both male and female, and people that needed or wanted their service just pulled up along the road and get in the back seat, and so it was a miserable way to make a living, that's for sure. But anyway, well, we drove into town, and he dropped me off in front of my hotel there. But I decided to get something to eat. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock, maybe, something like that, and I was kind of hungry, so I walked up the street and I saw this typical Italian restaurant. It wasn't high grade, real fancy, but it was it had tablecloths on the tables. As I stepped through the door, I noticed that behind the cashier was a grim-looking, heavy-set woman with dark, heavy eyebrows and black hair and a pretty intimidating look. But of course, that had no bearing on the food quality. But anyway, I went in and I sat down. Along this hall were little tables, maybe 2 or 3 feet square for single guests, and there was the chair was against the wall, and there was only one chair at the table. That was just ideal for a single person to eat there. They had male waiters, and they wore the towel over their arm and so forth, and a little white jacket. It was a nice place, and there was a big tray of desserts on a table. There was a table that was laid out with all their desserts. It really looked tempting. So I ordered my stuff, and while I'm waiting for my service, I kept watching the waiters and so forth. They come out of the kitchen holding a tray of food high above their heads on one hand, and really walk swiftly. And I watched the old man. He was obviously the husband of the cashier, and he was working at this table of desserts, rearranging and so forth. And all of a sudden, everything seemed to come to a halt. And I looked over at the doorway there, and a woman stepped in, and she was spectacular. I've seen some busty women, but boy, she really took the cake. And she wasn't a lightweight either. She was a little overweight, but she was muscular, very active woman, person. But man, oh man, and she was painted up. Oh, and she had a hat, and she was obviously a prostitute. And she'd come in to get dinner, and everybody watched her, and it was really funny to see the waiters coming out of the kitchen, and when they spotted her, it seemed as though their heads were on a swivel. They'd just focus their eyes on her while they walked with this tray held high overhead, and it was a wonder there wasn't a wreck. Well, there was a lot of commotion going on, and there were a lot of guests in the restaurant. It was very busy. But the comical part was the old man. Of course, he spotted her right away, and the old woman looked at him, and daring him to look at this prostitute. If he wanted to live, he'd better keep his eyes on the dessert. And of course, he got the message instantly, but he couldn't. I mean, he was just a human, that's all, and a man, so he couldn't keep his eyes off of her. the old woman was watching the prostitute and her husband trying to keep an eye on both of them and glaring at the at the old man and smiling at the prostitute. Oh, it was funny, and the old woman takes the prostitute leads her over to the table right next to me, and there weren't any people sitting in the 5 or 6 tables on each side of us, but she sat the prostitute down within 2 feet of me, right, and the adjoining table. Well, so I was part of the scene there then. And anyway, this prostitute ordered a bottle of wine and a pasto, which is a big old plate of vegetables, lettuce, and so forth, and a full 7-liter bottle of wine. And she proceeded to put that away, and then she ordered a meat dish, which came, and then there were some other dishes that came, and she ordered a dessert too, and she drank the whole bottle of wine. Oh, she ate enough for 2 people, but in the meantime, I stretched mine out until she left. I wanted to take in the whole scenario there, but it was something. Boy, it's been a long time ago already. It's 50 years ago. But anyway. I had another experience on that trip there in Milan. While I was there, I got a telephone call, which was really rare, that there was a mold in England and I needed to look at, and so I had to change my ticket because I hadn't planned to go to London. And so I went to the airline office there in downtown Milan, and I told them what I needed to do, and there wasn't any problem with it. And I told them to write the name of the airport. There were 2 airports at Milan, and I told them to write the airport, my departure airport name on the ticket because it changed from the old one, from the original one, and I didn't know where either one was, and I wanted to just show it to the cabbie so he'd know where to take me. So they wrote this name down, Malpensa, as I recall, was the name of the airport I was supposed to go to. So I got a cab, and it was quite a little way out there, 20, 30 miles maybe, and I got off at the airport. It didn't seem very busy, and the cab left, and I walked in, and I showed them my ticket, and they said, "Oh, you're at the wrong airport. You need to be at the Intercontinental Airport." The airport that I was at was the international one, and they didn't consider England as being international. So I had to go to the other airport, and I said, "Well, how would I get there? How far is it?" "Oh, it's 42 miles to that airport," and my flight was only a couple hours away. So I got a cabbie there, and I told him my problem, and he says, "Oh, no problem." Well, we drove. We made that 40 miles probably in maybe half an hour. He drove that like a maniac the whole way, but I made my flight anyway. When I got back, I wrote a letter to, I think it was American Airlines. I told them of that mistake, and that cab ride cost me $60 or $70, and it didn't cost me, it cost the company, and I told them I thought they should refund that. And I'll be darned if they didn't. In each case that I was in Portugal, I had to take a train from Lisbon to Porto because that's where the tool shops were. And Porto is north of Lisbon. Oh, I don't recall, 2 or 3 hours by train anyway. And this train was not a high-speed rail, so the mileage isn't comparable to that probably. But nevertheless, this train, an old passenger train, chugged up through the valleys and the mountains along the coast, and the people lived right along the tracks. I mean, it wasn't a disturbance to them apparently. So I could see inside houses as we chugged by at maybe 40 miles an hour or so. But I do remember one, and I saw it each time I was in Portugal. It was a wooded area, pines, and nice looking country. They apparently had sufficient rainfall there to grow crops, but it was wooded. And I noticed that the trees were white, really odd looking trees, ghostly looking trees for some time before we arrived at the source of this contamination. I suspect it was a cement plant. I'm not sure what kind of a factory generated these billowing clouds of white dust, but it had gone on for a long time. And I don't know if the trees were alive or not. I probably not with the coating of dust that they had, although maybe the rainfalls were frequent enough to wash the stuff off. But it was really pretty bad. I do remember is that when I was working for this company in Nashville, and we were in Lisbon that time, and we met the representative of the tool company there, this manager of the tooling department of this company, and myself. I was the vice president of engineering there. I went with him to Portugal to see what he was doing because I had some uneasy feelings about this guy. And we got to Portugal and met this representative that represented a number of tool shops over there. I hadn't dealt with him before. I dealt with a different one when I placed my couple of molds that I had built over there. But anyway, the first thing we did was go to the hotel and we get straightened up, and then this representative took us out to dinner, and we went to a very nice restaurant, and he ordered some hors d'oeuvres, which consisted of prawns, and a huge platter of prawns that were the size of a large cigar and straight like that. I'd never seen prawns before, I guess. And he ordered a bottle of 18-year-old port. And there were a couple of other guys with me and the representative. I think there were four of us. But anyway, the waiter set this stuff down on the table there, and oh boy, it sure looked good to me. And I tried the prawn, and it was delicious. And the wine was, oh, I've never tasted port wine like that before. But the other two guys that were with me didn't like either one of those. They didn't like the prawns or the port. I couldn't believe it. So I guess you know who made a pig of himself out of those prawns and that port. I've looked for port like that here in this country, but I can't find it. One of my kids even gave me a $80, no, actually it was over $100 bottle of port one time. Of course, he got it at a discount, but it was still a pretty high number. And it was 40 years old, but it wasn't. It was too old. It had passed its peak. Then after we ate, we went to a nightclub called the Hippopotamus. And I remember going down some stairs, and there were women in there. I mean, it was packed with free women. They weren't free, but their morals were. Oh my gosh, it was a really bad place. And when we walked in there, the guy that was reported to me, the manager of the tool department. When we walked in there, this one girl yelled, "Jimmy, Jimmy!" Jim was his first name. I won't give his last name, but Jimmy, oh, she was so glad to see Jimmy. Anyway, he looked a little bit squeamish when that happened, but he looked up with her. Anyway, there was plenty of opportunity for devious activity. Actually, I found out later, a couple months later, I made a surprise visit to a tool shop in Troy, Ohio that a mold was being worked on, and I caught the guy that was doing the work. There's nothing wrong with the work, but what they were doing is creating more work than was necessary to do it, and building then GM. It was a GM. Actually, it was a Toyota GM part for California. Uh, that plant out there, and it was obvious what was going on. But I got fired before I had a chance to do anything about it. So the company proceeded on for a couple of years after that, and then went bankrupt. It was a shame, really, because the company had an opportunity to really make a lot of money. We had $68 million worth of interior parts for the Oldsmobile and the Corvette. They just threw it down the tubes. But anyway, I don't want to get down that sidetrack at this point in time. My last trip to Portugal was I had a mold being built in Porto, and it was running late, and I got a call that the mold was ready for sampling. I needed to come over there right away and approve it. So I flew all the way to Lisbon and took the train back up to Porto, and I got off the train and I walked over to the mold manufacturing plant there, which was just a few blocks away. And I went in the back door and I walked through the machining part of the operation. I walked by this big mill and I noticed a piece of steel on the mill. This was a peculiar application. It was for a oil water separator on naval ships, and it had a corrugated surface on it. I don't know how it worked. I never could dope out the principle of it, but nevertheless, we were making a lot of these, and we needed new molds. So I recognized the configuration. So I was really a little upset because it looked like somebody was duplicating what we had the rights to. But anyway, I went in the office and the president was sitting there, and he told me, he said, well, he said, we're a day or two late. And I said, well, how can you be? You told me it was ready for sampling. And he said, well, he had some kind of, and it turned out that part on the mill was for my mold, and it was a good week or 10 days away from being finished. Oh, that really upset me. I wasted all that ticket money and time, because it's not easy to get to Portugal and to that shop. And I never placed any more work there, that's for sure. One thing I did get to do, though, while I was in Portugal, was go to Fatima and see the site there where the Blessed Virgin appeared to the three children in 1917, and the sun whirled around, and it's a tremendous miracle. People say it's the greatest miracle that happened since the Israelis crossed the Red Sea 3,000 years before that, and 70,000 people were there that day and witnessed the whole event. But if you're not familiar with Fatima and what happened there, it's worthwhile reading. And the prophecies that those children were told about the future, unless people repented and began to turn to God, have come to pass. She predicted World War II and a great sign in the sky before that war would start. And in late 1938, the sky over Europe had a unusually bright, and it looked like northern lights dancing over the whole continent, and it's never happened before or since either. But it was a warning coming to pass by her prophecy that World War II would start. And of course, the Germans invaded Czechoslovakia in 1938, and then September 1st, 1939, invaded Poland, and that triggered the beginning of World War II and the 6 years of nightmare and the slaughter of anywhere from 60 to 70 or 80 million people. The number will never be known, but it's a horrendous amount. And she also predicted that the things that are happening today, right this moment, in 2023, are coming to pass, and it's pretty obvious. So I was able to make two visits there. It's It's a place back in the mountains, very infertile ground, stony and rough and almost treeless, but it's the site of a great miracle. Well, I think that's about all I'm going to talk about on this one, and we'll go then to the next one.